We are going to get started. Good evening and welcome to Training Tuesday. I am Bill Brown. I am the Director of New Faith Expressions for the Baltimore-Washington Conference. I am joined tonight by my colleague, the Reverend Dr. Rodney Smothers, the Director of Leadership and Congregational Development. And together we bring you Training Tuesdays. Good evening, Dr. Smothers.
Good evening, Dr. Brown. How are you this evening?
I am doing well. We have a wonderful evening planned. Tonight is the last Training Tuesday of 2020, and just a couple of technical items before we get started. If you have a question for our presenters at any time during the evening, we do invite you to use the Q&A feature that's part of the Zoom webinar. So just click on Q&A and you can type in your question and we'll get to it at some point during the evening. So tonight is Clergy Care, Building Resiliency and Practicing Sabbath. We're joined by the Reverend Nick Bufano, who is the pastor of the West Towson Cooperative Parish, made up of Idlewild, St. John's, and Providence United Methodist Churches, and the Reverend Dr. Twanda Prioleau, who is the pastor of Christ United Methodist Church in Baltimore. And we're excited for their presentation tonight. And we're going to begin with Dr. Smothers opening us with a word of prayer.
Let us pray. Loving and gracious God, we give thanks for another day. We especially give thanks this evening that our two colleagues have joined us with information, inspiration, and instigation toward healthier relationships between clergy and laity, families and pastors, communities and care. We're grateful for this format that allows us to share in their wisdom, their experience, and the seeds that they will plant among us, both clergy and lay this evening, to make our work together more profitable, healthier, and wisdom-filled. So with those words, we ask all of these things in Christ's name. Amen.
Amen.
Once again, thank you for joining us tonight, Twanda and Nick. I know our colleagues have been work hard, but during this pandemic especially, I think are working harder than ever. So what a timely topic to talk about self-care and how churches can care for their clergy. And so we're going to let you take it away and share with us your wisdom and knowledge tonight.
And thank you, Bill. It is good to be here this evening, I'm sorry, with Nick. I'm going to share my PowerPoint presentation, and the way the night is going to go is I am going to start off by doing some clergy burnout statistics. I'm going to talk about some clergy burnout statistics. I'm going to go into building resiliency in ministry. Nick is going to talk about what is Sabbath, and then I'm going to come back and talk about how our SPRC committees can support clergy in Sabbath, and then Nick's going to come back and talk about just practical ways of practicing Sabbath. And so I'm going to share my screen at this moment.
As you're doing that, Twanda, I do want to remind people, because they will ask, we are recording tonight's presentation and the slides will be available with the recording later this week. So don't worry, if you do miss something, you'll be able to go back and watch it again.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so here we are again. I'm Reverend Twanda Prioleau, and I have Reverend Nick Bufano with me. And so our objective tonight is to provide clergy and SPRC committee members current and practical information about engaging in self-care that builds resiliency for ministry. Participants will also be introduced to contemporary concepts of Sabbath and will be provided with take-home practices to begin right away. And so I want to start by talking about, just some clergy statistics when it comes to stress and burnout in ministry with clergy. And I just think this is good for us to understand, especially during this time, during this pandemic time, where the stress level is even higher than it was probably when these statistics were taken. But I just think it's important for clergy to know this, and also SPRC committees to actually know this. So let me just kind of give you some information when it comes to just statistics around burnout risk with clergy. So when you look at the burnout risk with clergy, that burnout risk, clergy are less confident in their calling today when they began ministry. I'm just going to go through a couple of them. We see that the rate of mental and emotional health as average, below average, or poor, and this is among clergy, seldom or never engaged in ministry work. And this is clergy that's at a high burnout risk, frequently feel inadequate for their calling or ministry, frequently feel emotionally or mentally exhausted, have suffered from depression sometime during their ministry. These are clergy that have a high burnout risk, not satisfied with their pastoral vocation, not satisfied with ministry at their current church. Tenure at their current church has been a disappointment. Tenure at their current church has not increased their passion for ministry, and their primary day-to-day tasks do not fit their calling or gift. And so this is clergy that falls into relationship risk. Relationship risk. They rate their relationship with their spouse as below average or poor, rate their relationship with their children as below average or poor, rate their satisfaction with friendships as average, below average, or poor, frequently or sometimes feel lonely or isolated from others, seldom or never feel well supported by people close to them, say it's completely true that ministry has been difficult on their family, and report a difficult relationship with their board or church elders. Now, this is spiritual risk is clergy who are at risk spiritually. They rate their spiritual well-being as average, below average, or poor. Say it is very or somewhat difficult to invest in their own spiritual development. And this happened with clergy where they are developing the church, but they find it difficult to find time to invest in their own spiritual development. They receive spiritual support from peers or a mentor several times a year or less, which means they don't get that support themselves. Say their tenure at their current church has not deepened their own relationship with Christ. And so these are just statistics, and this was done in 2017. So imagine what's going on with clergy now, that we're operating at a high level of stress because of the pandemic. I just want to highlight some more. So we have 13% of active pastors are divorced. 33% felt burnt out within their first 5 years of ministry. And I want to say this as a clergy person who's serving now in her 10th year of ministry and suffered clergy burnout in my 7th year of ministry. I can tell you that these statistics are true. 40% of pastors and 47% of spouses are suffering from burnout, frantic schedules, and or unrealistic expectations. 45% of pastors say that they have experienced depression or burnout to the extent that they needed to take a leave of absence from ministry. And I'm sure my colleagues that's on the call can identify with some of these statistics. 50% feel unable to meet the needs of the job, 57% will leave the pastorate if they had somewhere else to go or some other vocation they could do. That's a high number. We're talking about almost 60% of pastors. 70% don't have any close friends. 80% believe that pastoral ministry affects their families negatively. 90% work more than 50 hours a week. 1,500 pastors leave their ministries each month due to burnout, conflict, or moral failure. Doctors, lawyers, and clergy have the most problems with drug abuse, alcoholism, and suicide. And I know some of you on here tonight are looking at these statistics like, wow. But let me tell you, this is true data. And this happens with clergy. So I am thanking the Baltimore-Washington Conference just for an opportunity just to talk about this when it comes to clergy and just the importance of self-care, and that self-care is high, should be high on our list. Because when it's high on our list, when we're good as clergy, we can effectively lead healthy congregations. Healthy pastors lead healthy congregations. And so I want to go into this Nehemiah. In Nehemiah, and I love this scripture, in Nehemiah 4:10, it says, "But Judah said, the strength of the burden bearers is failing, and there is too much rubbish so that we are unable to work on the wall." And just to let you know a little about what was going on, they were actually building a wall, and the stress of it, not only stress on the outside, but the stress on the inside in their camp, was getting to be so much that their strength was failing them. And I love this scripture because I love it when it comes to pastors, because we are burden bearers. And there are times when it becomes so much that it feels like that we're unable to complete the work in which God has called us to do. So I'm going to quickly go over. Do you bend or break? Bend or break when it comes to being resilient for ministry. So what is resilience? What it's not is resilience is not the absence of distress or difficulty. It's not the absence of it. Resilience is the ability to adapt and grow following adversity. And I think all of us need that now, to have resilience, to have the ability to adapt during this pandemic and grow in the midst of it and as a result of it. My prayer is that all of us come out of this stronger, that God do something in all of us, that we come out this stronger. So what is resilience? Psychologists define resilience as the process of adapting well in the face of adversity, trauma, tragedy, threats, or significant sources of stress, such as family and relationship problems, serious health problems, or workplace financial stresses. As much as resilience involves bouncing back from these difficult experiences, it can also involve profound personal growth. So as I was saying, is our desire and my desire, and I think all of our desire, is that as a result of this, we will grow, that we will bend but not break in the midst of what we're going through. So I'm just going to go over just a couple of things that we can do to build resilience. I'm not going to go too far into it, but just a couple of things that we can do to build resilience as clergy. And I'm coming from the American Psychological Association. You know, how can we build resilience to stress? And one way that we can build resilience to stress is build connections. Build connections. We cannot do this by ourselves. Prioritize your relationships. Prioritize relationships. Connect with people who are empathetic and understand you. People who can understand and remind you that you are not alone in what it is that you're going through. Build relationships. Don't forget to connect to people. Do not do ministry by yourself. It's important that we do not do ministry by ourselves. So let's build connections. Connect. I thank God for the Baltimore-Washington Conference, and I thank God for the United Methodist Church. And that is because it's one thing that we have that a lot of denominations do not have, and that is our connection. Mm-hmm. We are blessed by the connection. And so I thank God for that. And the other is foster wellness. How do I foster wellness? Take care of yourself in the midst of this. Take care of your body. Self-care, I know right now, is a popular buzzword. It's a popular buzzword, right? But guess what? It's also a legitimate practice for mental health and building resilience. That's because stress is just as much physical as it is emotional. It's just as much physical as it is emotional. So I'm going to try to go through these and also find purpose. So you might be saying, you know what? I do have purpose. My purpose is in the church. And we do say that as clergy, and God has called us into this great ministry. But I want to encourage you to find something outside the church. It's important that you find something else outside of the church that will feed your soul. And I'm going to tell you what happens to clergy that do not have anything outside the church that feeds into them. They begin to look to the church to do that. They look to the church to feed them. And they are clergy that find themselves not taking Sabbath, not taking vacation, not taking time off, because their all in all is in the church. Find something outside of the church to do. And then think healthy thoughts. Embrace healthy thoughts. Think on these things, like Paul tells us. Think on these things. Things are things are that are a good report. Think healthy thoughts. Don't let stuff ruminate in your mind about the church constantly, daily, every day. Remember, we're building resiliency in ministry. And so I'm going to turn it over to Nick. And Nick, no, I'm sorry. I just had one more thing. I'm sorry.
That's all right.
Yeah, and this is important. I'm sorry, I missed this one. This is important. It's okay to ask for help. It's okay to ask for help. Seek help. Get yourself a therapist. Get yourself a therapist. It's okay to ask for help. I can't stress that enough. Get yourself a therapist. It's okay to ask for help. And I'm going to say, don't wait until you get to the point where you're suffering burnout to get a therapist. Get a therapist before you hit that point. One that you can talk to on a consistent basis so that you're not emoting on Facebook and to your church. Get yourself a therapist. Now I'm going to turn it over to Nick.
So friends, my task tonight is to share with you some contemporary thoughts about Sabbath. But before we go any further, I just want to say that as we're building on this idea of resilience, just the top three that Twanda shared with you, if you want to build connections, you want to foster wellness, if you want to find purpose, one of the spiritual practices that is an absolute necessity for us as clergy and as laity is this idea of maintaining our Sabbath. And so to start my part of the conversation tonight, we're going to watch just a few-minute video with this gentleman sharing about Sabbath, and I'll tell you more about him in a minute.
You might even find yourself meeting some unexpected sadness that's been in your body for a very long time. You're not sad because you're here on retreat. If we get quiet, the still things rise like cream to the surface of our awareness, and we remember all the things that we're holding. And so sometimes we get frightened of Sabbath time, because if we get quiet, I'm going to feel all these things. But the promise is that beneath that suffering is the grace that will bear you up. That's the faith. Sabbath practice is so much about faith. And I learned in the darkest times of my own illnesses that when I lost that faith in the dark night of the soul, I needed others' faith to hold me up. It's faith that we will be held and loved regardless of how much we've done. It's faith that if we let it be, God and the angels will take care of it. It's faith that whatever we give will be sacred and blessed and holy, and in which God will be well pleased. It's faith that we will be worthy, as all of the children that we serve are worthy to be loved and cared for and treasured and held as precious. And there's a humility in the Sabbath that it's not up to us. Our grandparents were doing this work long before we. And God willing, if there is a world for them to live in, our children's children's children will be doing this work after we're gone. The humility is that it's not our work, it's God's work. And so you can let it go from time to time. And we'll be okay. Really. And we do have your number in case we're not. Two more poems from my friend Mark Nepo. Tell me you have come. There is a timing larger than any of us, a readiness that comes and goes, like the heat that makes our secret walls melt. How many times have I passed exactly what I need, only noticing the stream when troubled by thirst? The mystery is that whoever shows up when we dare to give has exactly what we need hidden in their trouble. And then this one is called At the Window. I was at the window when a fly near the latch was on its back spinning, legs furious, going nowhere. I thought to swat it, but something in its struggle was too much my own. It kept spinning and began to tire. Without moving closer, I exhaled steadily, my breath a sudden wind, and the fly found its legs, rubbed its face, and flew away. I continued to stare at the latch, hoping that someday the breath of something incomprehensible would right me and enable me to fly. So go forth this afternoon into spiritual uselessness. The galaxy will turn today without your assistance.
So this gentleman is named Wayne Muller, and he wrote a book called, creatively enough, called Sabbath. I would encourage you to Google it, check it out. It's one of those books that not only sits on my desk, but it sits open on my desk much of the time. And we're going to talk a bit about what Muller says about Sabbath today, because he offers sort of a contemporary look at what Sabbath should look like. And he talks in the video about Sabbath being a time when you might remember the things that you're holding. And so you bring things to Sabbath that come clear to you. You enter into conversations with God where you can hear God really clearly. And Muller implies that that might be a reason that some people try to avoid it, right? I know I do. When I don't want to hear what God has to say to me, the last thing I want to do is engage in a practice where those silent lines of communication get open. And so he says some people might avoid Sabbaths for that reason. What I really want to talk about today is this idea that in order for us as clergy and as you all as SPRC members to buy into this idea of Sabbath, in order for clergy to willingly and sort of in a carefree way engage in Sabbath, and in order for folks in church leadership to encourage and support their clergy in taking Sabbath, then Muller would say we have to have this idea of faith. And here's where I want to pause. So he talks about this idea that in order for us to buy into Sabbath, it's critical for us to have faith that all of the stuff that we're doing, right? All of the ministry that we do together, both clergy and laity, it doesn't belong to us. Right? It's hard for us to understand that. It never really belonged to us to begin with. It belonged to God. When I look at this quote, I think about the time I was early on my first appointment, and I was sitting on the back porch of the parsonage on my Sabbath day. I remember it like it was yesterday. We're talking 10 years ago or so. And I was looking over at the church that was across the parking lot, and I was looking at the flurry of activity going on at the church. And it struck me that, hey, it was all going on without me, right? It was all happening, whether I was there or I wasn't there. The church life was going on, whether I was present or whether I wasn't present. And I remember that being a very humbling experience for me as a young pastor, because at one time or another, I suppose I thought it sort of all had to happen when I was there. And Muller wants us to understand that no, indeed, it goes on without us, and it's okay. And we have to have this faith that when we step away, he says, God and the angels will take care of it while we rest. So just very quickly on this slide, why is it that we take Sabbath? It's a really simple answer. We take Sabbath because God did. And you start out way back in the book of Genesis with this passage, the heavens and the earth and all who live in them were completed. On the sixth day, God completed all the work that he had done. And on the seventh day, God rested from all the work he had done. God blessed the seventh day and made it holy because on it God rested. Because on it God rested, right? Even God took a Sabbath day. And I do this little contemporary translation, see if it fits any of us. The church fundraising campaign was finished. The sixth committee meeting on Zoom of the week was over. Bible study came to a conclusion. The floor of the fellowship hall had been mopped. And on the seventh day, and I inserted the word church leader here because it's both clergy and laity. On the seventh day, the church leader rested from all the work she or he had done. The church leader blessed that day and made it holy because on that day, the church leader rested from all the work. So what happens when we actually take a successful Sabbath? What does Sabbath look like? Well, Muller would say this. He says, when we take a Sabbath, we're remembering. It's taking time to remember. And what we remember is to celebrate what is beautiful and what is sacred. And then he makes a list. Here are some things you could do when you take a Sabbath. You might light a candle. You might sing a song. You might tell stories. You might eat good food. You might nap. I don't know how many of my colleagues on the call tonight are like me. Napping is a key piece to my Sabbath practice, and it should be part of yours too. It's time, he says, to let our work, he goes on and adds lands and animals. But I want to say Sabbath time for us in 2020, in the middle of a pandemic, it's time to let our work lie fallow. Just let it rest. Some of us have a really hard time doing that. I'm one of those people, right? It's time to let our work lie fallow, just to sit there for us to become nourished and refreshed. Because when we return to work after our Sabbath, don't worry, the work will still be there. This is the most critical piece of what I'm going to share with you tonight. What happens if we don't take the time? Muller would say that if we don't take the rest, it becomes something bigger than a personal problem. It does indeed become a personal issue for both clergy and laity. If you don't take your Sabbath time, it becomes to affect you personally, as Twanda told us at the beginning with her statistics, right? But he would say it's even bigger than a personal issue. He said it colors the way we build and sustain community. It dictates the way we respond to suffering, and it shapes the way in which we seek peace and healing in the world. I just look at those words one more time. Those things couldn't be clearer, more clarifying job descriptions of a pastor, in particular right now in the middle of this pandemic. We're working to sustain our communities. We're responding to boatloads of suffering, and we're trying to seek peace and healing in our world. And if we don't take that rest, I know when I don't take my Sabbath time, my empathy gets low. And I hope that other people don't see it, but I know it. I can tell by the way that I'm responding to people in their suffering. I can tell by the way that I'm responding to people on social media. I can tell by the way that I'm thinking about things that I need my rest. The second piece is this. He says, without rest, we respond from what he calls survival mode. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm a list maker. So before I go to bed every night, I jot down the top 5 or 6 things that I need to do the next day. And the things that are occupying space number 1 and space number 2, those things absolutely have to get done when they have to get done. But if I don't rest, if I don't take my Sabbath days, everything occupies that number 1 spot. I start to think like absolutely everything is what does he say? He says everything assumes a terrifying prominence. Things that if I had rested and thought about, things that could be put off or delayed, all have to be done at the same time. And it becomes terrifying for the person that has to do them. He says we lost our essential rhythm, that our culture tells us that we should be doing something. It doesn't matter what it is, but we should be doing something as opposed to ever doing nothing. It's not good to do nothing. Our culture tells us that. If the busier we are, the better off we are, right? We've all been to meetings with clergy where we take out our calendars. Now it's our phones, of course, but we take out our calendars and we say, oh, I have 7 meetings today and 13 tomorrow. And it's almost like a badge of honor, right? When we can talk about the fact that we haven't slept, we're exhausted, and the one of us that's doing the most, it seems like we're buying for a trophy, but there is no trophy, friends. There's no trophy. The idea is that we're responding to what culture is calling us to do instead of doing what God is calling us to do. And he says in that last sentence, if we don't rest, we lose our way. Here's another important thought. Sabbath is more than the absence of work. It is not just a day off when we catch up on television or errands. I'm going to say something that you might not agree with. Sabbath is not about doing, if it's my house, doing the sink full of dishes that's been there for 3 days, right? Sabbath is not about mowing the lawn or doing the laundry. Now, don't misunderstand me. All of that is godly work, right? God is immersed in all the things that we do. I'm not saying it's not godly, but I am saying it's not Sabbath. If you're working, it's not Sabbath. If you're doing household chores, it's not Sabbath. He says, it is the presence of something that arises when we consecrate a period of time to listen, again, to what is beautiful, to what is nourishing, and to what is true. I don't care how much you like to do laundry or wash the dishes. Those things are not beautiful, nourishing, or true. Not when we're trying to reconnect with God and to really accomplish what Sabbath is. So no chores or housework on Sabbath time. If I had to pick a line out of the whole book that I liked the best, this is it. Sabbath does not require us. So let me back up for a second. We're really good. I'm really good as clergy people and perhaps laity as well at coming up with excuses for not having our Sabbath time. Here's the line that puts all of that to rest. Sabbath does not require us to leave our house, to change our jobs, to go on retreat. I'm a big proponent of retreats, but you don't have to go on retreat to take your Sabbath, or to leave the world of ordinary life. That's a good thing for us, right? Since last March, that we don't have to leave the world. We don't have to leave our home or change our jobs. We can find Sabbath right where we are. We do not have to change clothes, and this is the best part, or purchase any expensive spiritual equipment. Nothing is required except to remember. And remember what we're remembering. We're remembering what is beautiful and what is true. I'll let you read this slide to yourself. Sort of an eye-opener, right? We don't take our Sabbath will find us, right? It will come in the form of illness, pneumonia, cancer, heart attack, or accident. Sabbath will catch up with us if we don't make it a priority for ourselves. And this is a repeat, but I want you to hear it one more time. Sabbath is critical to the life of the clergy person and the life of the lay person as well. Therefore, it becomes critical for the life of our church communities, right? We've lost our essential rhythm. Again, we're pushing back against this idea that being busy is better than not being busy. And success is about being busy. And it's up to us as the church to negate that concept. Because if we don't rest, we lose our way.
Thank you, Nick, for that powerful presentation to remind us about Sabbath.
I'm going to break in for a second with some questions.
Sure.
Before we get into the SPRC, if you could stop sharing screen for a minute, and that way we can see, because so far, my gracious, the information you are sharing, pay attention. The burnout rates, I mean, some of the things you were saying, Twanda, are frightening. And a wake-up call. And it's better to have it in a seminar such as this than to experience where you are at the end. But how do you build that relationship then, Twanda? Because we do live in a culture of individualism. So how do you build those intentional connections with others, particularly with those outside the church?
I think, Bill, it's important for us to first understand and come to the realization that we had friends outside the church before we became pastors, right? And one thing about friends, stay connected to your friends that are not saved. Because unsaved friends, in a strange way, will humble you, right? So stay connected to those friends. It's important that we stay connected to those friends. And it's important also, Bill, that we stay connected to family. I mean, you saw the relationship risk that I talked about. And a lot of times the relationship that goes first are the relationships that we had before we became a pastor and our family relationships. Because the church becomes the family. And it's easy for our church to become our family. So I would say continue to cultivate those relationships that you had before you was a pastor. And I said this at some point, and that is, I thank God for our connection. Use your clergy friends.
And I think particularly in an itinerant system, you know, I know for myself, I found a hobby. And then with my hobby, I found other people who enjoy my hobby, so we can hang out and do those things together. And that builds some camaraderie and some friendships beyond the church. In an itinerant system, if you put all of yourself into a church and that becomes your friends and family, and when you are moved, that becomes an even greater challenge. One of our attendees tonight says, "You're preaching now. Unsaved friends will keep us grounded. That sounds like there's a sermon in there. Unsafe. And so a follow-up for that from one of our participants, Twanda, what are some of the signs of clergy burnout? So how can, and you may get to this, if you are, tell me, we'll get to this, but if not, how can a lay person or an SPRC member recognize some clergy burnout in their pastor before it's too late?
Wow, that is definitely a good question. I would say that a pastor will begin to operate in an anxious way all the time. Like as clergy, we should be a non-anxious presence to the congregation, and it will get to the point where we're no longer a non-anxious presence in the congregation. You know, we show up anxious a lot, and it has an impact on our decision making, because what happens is we begin to make decisions like sometimes we do have to make quick decisions, but sometimes we begin to make decisions where we're not thinking those decisions through. And I'm kind of talking to the clergy, but you did say, and that's somebody in an SPRC asked that question, you know, how could you recognize? Unfortunately, sometimes, Bill, we can mask it. We can mask it. And we can mask it by doing a whole lot where it seems like we're just so busy, right? We can mask it. And I know I did. You know, I suffered clergy burnout, and I masked it well, right? I put on a mask, and I did it well until I got to the point where I hit a wall. But I'm going to say to the SPRC committee on here, I would say constantly pray for your pastor. And not only constantly pray for your pastor, ask your pastor, how are you doing? Ask your pastor, how well is your soul? You never know that if your pastor show up at a meeting and somebody just say, Pastor, how are you today? What that would do to your pastor.
I don't want to put you under the microscope, Twanda, but you brought it up since I know you a lot of this is born out of your experience. Is it safe to say that when you were in the midst of that burning out process, did your behavior change?
It did.
So there could be somebody in your life, whether it's a spouse, a family member, a close friend, who may have noticed that and could have brought it to someone's attention.
I'm gonna say yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's good to keep some of those relationships open where people will notice that. A question for you.
Let me say this, Bill.
Okay, go ahead.
Now that I think about it, one of the signs could have been, you know, people constantly tell you that you're busy all the time. And people do say that, but sometimes that should spark us to begin to look at what it is that we're doing. If people are saying you are busy all the time, you know, we are busy, but I don't think it should seem like we're busy all the time.
Yeah, and I've had friends say to me, you know, you're not acting the same, or you look tired, or those dark circles under your eyes. I just think some of those signs could be symptoms of just, it's been a busy week, versus I'm getting myself into a pattern of unhealthy work habits. Nick, so you use Sabbath a lot. What's the difference between taking a Sabbath and having a day off?
So I would sort of go back to my what I said earlier. For me, a day off would be a day to mow the lawn and do the dishes, or drive my children around, right? Those of us that have kids. So that's a piece of it. A Sabbath day to me, when I'm done with a Sabbath day, I feel like I've reconnected with God. So I walk away from, whether it's a half a day, a full day, a couple hours, I walk away from that experience having heard God much more clearly than I would perhaps on a day off, because I'm making a deliberate attempt to listen, a deliberate attempt to get rid of the things that would distract me, perhaps, even on a day off.
So is it safe to say what I'm hearing you say is perhaps a Sabbath is my intentional time to reconnect with God?
Yes.
And my day off is my errand day, my lawn mowing day, my laundry day, my get everything else done day. And I say that because I know I was called out and during one of my appointments, and I had an SPRC member look at me and say, "So do you think you're better than us?" And I said, "What do you mean?" He says, "Well, the rest of us take 2 days off. Why are you only doing 1 day?"
Right, right.
And so we had that conversation about taking a day for Sabbath and then taking a day off to do all of that other stuff. So,
yeah.
I mean,
and I would say, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Go ahead, no.
I would say too that our bishop has encouraged us as clergy to be sure that we are taking Sabbath, but we're also taking that second day, and that's important. And I was going to say, I do want to say that you can spend the day with your family, and it can still be Sabbath. I don't want to imply that you have to run away or hide in a room somewhere, or I've spent days with my kids taking a hike through a park. That can be Sabbath. It's the work, the tasks that I try to avoid. I've had many a beautiful Sabbath experience with my family, and that's okay. I'd encourage it, actually.
Dr. Smothers.
You all are having some very polite conversation, but part of the challenge is that Sabbath is not built into the culture of many congregations. And you can tell that by looking at the church calendar. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. If the church calendar has events scheduled every day of the week and there are no white spaces on the calendar, then the culture of that church is not a culture that understands Sabbath, because the entire community needs to take Sabbath. Mm-hmm. Every Saturday shouldn't have something that requires everybody to be at the church. The strange thing about this is that many of the churches are organized to defeat the purpose of Sabbath. That's one reason why we are promoting very heavily moving from the administrative council model to the one board model, unified church model, so that you don't have to have so many administrative meetings. Because when the truth is told, on an average week, you see the same people in 3 or 4 meetings. And that's counterproductive to what Sabbath should look like. If a healthy church is going to have, obviously, some administrative meetings, there should be some spiritual development meetings, there should be some community meetings, but people should not be in meeting Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday of any week. Mm-hmm. Any week. Now, the laity are going to start throwing things at my screen because part of this comes out of their tradition. We always met on this night. We always met on this Saturday. We always did this on the third Sunday after church. And in that regard, COVID has helped us because it's given us a window now to make some significant adjustments. Many of our pastors and lay leaders now are actually moving into Zoom burnout. Mm-hmm. Because we have discovered this wonderful tool to meet with people remotely and digitally, but like all good things, we're overdoing it. Mm-hmm. And I really think we ought to get some type of tag to put around our neck, like a radiation badge, that every time you do more than so many Zoom meetings in a week, that it starts glowing. It goes off. Yeah, so you can't do another one. You can't do another one. You can't do another one. And so I think, and I want to hear both of you, and you may say this as you get back into your presentation, talk to us a little bit about the struggle of getting congregations to understand that they are very much responsible for changing their own culture to make the church healthier, so that there are at least 1 or 2 nights in the week where the lights at the church are not on. And by that, I mean, nobody's on Zoom, nobody's in a Bible study, nobody's in an administrative meeting, that you literally are home renewing from all the day's activities.
Yeah, I had said to Bill earlier, and Rodney, you just said it also, I think the virus, as horrific as it has been, has shown us things that we can get rid of. Mm-hmm. Right? That we don't have to do the way we've always done. And my prayer and my hope for my own churches, but to the Church Universal, is that we don't come out of this when we come out of it and just go right back to what we were doing before. Instead, I'm hoping that some of the things we're doing now will hold, will stay, because they're much healthier than what we were doing before. But there is great resistance, and I'm not experiencing it currently, but I have experienced it, and I see colleagues experience it. There is great resistance to doing something different, because folks like what feels like it always has felt. Right. And it's something I think, as I said, I hope the church comes out of this pandemic better off, not and healthier.
Well, I think this will lead back. Go ahead, Twanda.
I was going to say, this has given us an opportunity as clergy and church to recalibrate. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And also I just believe that healthy, and I'm not trying to throw it back on the pastor, because there is a lot of resistance. I know I experienced a lot of resistance when I took Sabbath leave. Mm-hmm. From my congregation, but I do want to say that the more healthy we are as clergy, and we model self-care as clergy, the more healthy our churches are, and that is when we model it in our body, in our eating, in our mindset, in our taking time off, the way we care for our family. I believe that spills over to our congregation, and as much resistance that I got from my church from taking a Sabbath leave, my prayer is that I'm a better pastor, and we might not see it right away. I'm 2 years removed now, that I will be a better pastor, and as a result, I will be able to lead a better congregation.
Well, we'll get back to your presentation, because I know you're going to talk about SPRC, and they're the advocates with resistance, with having this culture changed for our laity on the call. You are the advocates for the health of your clergy, which is also advocating for the health of your church. So, mm-hmm.
Are we going back?
Let's go back in. Let's dive in. SPRC.
Okay, SPRC support. So with SPRC committee, how can I support my pastor? Pray. Pray for your pastor. Pray for your pastor. Pray for your pastor. Pray for your pastor. Right? I cannot stress that enough, that pray for your pastor. And another thing, the way the SPRC committee could support the pastor, and I said this, ask your pastor, how are they doing? When you get into a staff-parish relations committee meeting, ask your pastor, how are you? And another way that you can do that, if it looked like your pastor is being, let's say, overworked or something like that, ask your pastor, when was the last time you took time off? Mm-hmm. Pastor, when was the last time you had your Sabbath? Pastor, we realize that it is October and you have not had vacation this year. It's October, Pastor, and you have not had vacation. Suggest that your pastor take time off. Mm-hmm. The SPRC committee wants you to take time off. And I want to share this. There it is. The Baltimore-Washington Conference have a policy and procedure manual. You can find it on the conference website. You can find it on the conference website. Download this manual so that when your pastor come and say some things to you, you already know it as a committee. Mm-hmm. Stay informed with what's going on around the conference when it comes to pastors and self-care, stuff like that. Stay informed as a committee. And I want to tell you where that is. So if you go to the conference website and you hit on the search button, you can bring up policy and procedures. This document will come up. It's like the first or second thing that will pop up. And it was edited back in August of this year. I just looked it up. So if you go on page 68, paragraph 4034 is vacation. 4034 is vacation. The minimum vacation, the minimum benefit for pastors is 4 weeks vacation per year, including 4 Sundays. That's the minimum. And the reason why I said minimum, because you can negotiate you can negotiate more vacation with your pastor. My congregation was not able to give me give me a raise. We didn't do it for about 2 years. So we negotiated another week of vacation for the pastor. We negotiated that. More time off for the pastor. So go to paragraph 4034. It starts on page 68. Look up vacation. Whether you have a part-time pastor, full-time pastor, part-time pastors get vacation. You negotiate that time with them. You negotiate that with them and the district superintendent. They get time off as well. Because a lot of times, and I need to say this, when it comes to our part-time clergy, a lot of times our part-time clergy, they might be at the church for half-time, three-quarter time, 3/4 time, however we say that, right? But I guarantee you they putting in more than that time. Yeah. I guarantee you. And so negotiate more time for your pastor. That's how you can support the pastor. And also, I want to say this Sabbath leave. When Sabbath leave, the idea of Sabbath leave came up to my church when I approached the church for Sabbath leave. And I want to tell you, mine came out of burnout. That's what it came out of me burning out. My prayer is that your pastor do not burn out in ministry. And I want to put this plug there here, if I can do this right now.
Yeah, go for it.
I wrote a book. It's called Breathe, A Pastor's Journey to Wholeness. This is my book, Breathe, A Pastor's Journey to Wholeness. It'll make a wonderful Christmas gift for your pastor. You can find it on Amazon, but I want to say this. This is my journey and how I got to the point 7 years in ministry that I had to tap out. Called my district superintendent one day. I couldn't take no more, hit a brick wall, and I had to tap out. And my conversation with her went like this. Either I take time off or I quit. Don't let your pastor get to that point. Don't allow your pastor to get to that point. So Sabbath leave 4035, paragraph 4035 talks about Sabbath leave. I'm not going to read all of it, but I do want to read this part, which I think is important. I think this part is important. It says, the Baltimore-Washington Conference approves in principle the concept of Sabbath leave for clergy to help restore perspective on God-given tasks, to bring a sense of appreciation for themselves and their church, and to assist in the restoration of effectiveness and balance in ministry. Such Sabbath leave would be the encouragement and approval of the district superintendent in cooperation with the church. But this is the part that I want to point out. Be for a period of 3 months, available every 7th year for those under full-time appointment. And why did I want to point that out? Every time you get a new pastor at your church, this is what I want you to do. Ask that pastor, what year, this is important, what year are you in serving full-time in the Baltimore-Washington conference, and have you ever taken a Sabbath leave? Ask your pastor that. Why is that important? Because pastors are getting to the point where now they know the conference policy. Some pastors did not know this policy. I did not know it until I hit a brick wall. And there are pastors in the Baltimore-Washington conference who have been serving 14 years, 21 years, and have never taken a Sabbath leave. So that it doesn't hit the congregation by surprise, if the SPRC knew this ahead of time, it could be something that they encourage the pastor to take. And you might say, well, you know, this came up in my congregation, that the congregation would lose money, you know, but guess what? We are not the church. Mm-hmm. The pastor, we are in collaborative ministry with the congregation. We do collaborative ministry. And let me tell you, God will do some amazing things if you guys come together creatively and figure out how the church will be cared for. And 3 months when the pastor, we have some well-equipped clergy in the Baltimore-Washington conference that will be on standby, that can care for your congregation in your pastor's absence. So know this policy, and you can support your pastor by asking them, what year are you in full-time ministry, and have you ever taken Sabbath leave? Because I'm letting you know that because a lot of pastors know this, a lot of pastors are looking forward to it. Mm-hmm. So that's one way that's a couple ways that you can encourage your pastor. That is, pray for your pastor, pray for your pastor, pray for your pastor, pray for your pastor, pray for your pastor. And know the conference policy when it comes to vacation and Sabbath leave, and hold your pastor accountable to it. Mm-hmm. Just ask your pastor, Pastor, it's October. You haven't taken vacation. And you know what? When are you taking vacation? Mm-hmm. And we need you to take vacation before December the 31st. The church is going to be okay. We absolutely need you to take vacation, because I want to say this, and I can't stress this enough. Healthy pastors grow healthy congregations. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Healthy pastors. This came out of my experience. I'm telling you from experience. I burnt out. I tapped out. I hit a wall. It was either take 3 months off or quit. And I thank God. And let me say this. Baltimore-Washington Conference is one of the conferences in our denomination that give pastors a 3-month Sabbath leave. I just want to say that. So I can't stress that enough. We need your support when it comes to our care, our Sabbath leave, our vacation. And you might say, why do we have to remind you all to do that? You know, why do you? Let me tell you, there are people who pride themselves on secular jobs that they've been working I've been on the job for 25 years, and I got 6, I'm retiring with like 4 months of vacation. And I'm like, why? Why are you retiring with all this vacation? Take time off. I cannot stress it enough. So I'm going to bring Nick back. And he's go ahead.
Oh, you've opened it up. We're going to pause. So Just some things for our participants. If you look in the chat window, I have put a link to the Policies and Procedures Manual so you can find it easily. And I also put a link to Reverend Prioleau's book on Amazon. And so for ease for that, to answer your question, I've been in ministry under appointment for almost 30 years. My last Sabbath was 2016.
And let me ask you this, Bill. Was that your first Sabbath?
No, that was my second.
His second Sabbath. That's good.
So the big question I have is, because a Sabbath leave is, because I've had congregations say this to me, so you want us to give you 3 months of paid vacation. And I know that's not what Sabbath leave is. So what do you do during Sabbath leave?
When I had Sabbath leave, Bill, that's a good question. I actually really laid it out for my congregation. And so there was my reason for one, I had burnt out, but I came up with a plan for restoration to, so that God can restore. And so it was for me to, one, connect back to God. That was my first thing, was connect back to God. The second was to connect to my family. That was my second, connect to my family. And the third was to connect to a therapist. So that was the three things that I focused on during my Sabbath leave. I really spelled it out. First it was to do nothing, right? But I'm gonna tell you, I fell in love again with getting up in the morning, meeting God for the sake of being in the presence of God, for me and God, and not for being in the presence of God to get a word for Sunday morning. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Because as clergy, we can get to the point that, and I'm only being honest, right? We can get to the point as clergy where our time with God is only to meet God to get a word for the congregation. Mm-hmm. Somebody need to say ouch. One of the clergy out there just need to say ouch. I mean, you don't have to put it in the chat.
I was gonna amen.
You don't have to put it in the chat. You don't have to say nothing. You don't have to high-five your neighbor.
And I think it's good to point out that in our Policies and Procedures Manual, there is some guidelines for the Sabbath leave to be. I mean, it is a time of rest. It is a time of renewal. It is a time of reflection. Some clergy have books that come out of it. Some have studies that come out of it. I know during my Sabbath leave, my focus was on the Wesleyan movement and discipleship in a Wesleyan movement following the footsteps of John and Charles Wesley. And so there is an educational component to that will then come back and benefit the local church.
Exactly. My book, Bill, came out of my Sabbath leave.
One of the things you all have not discussed is the discussion with SPRC around your compensation while you're on Sabbath, and who pays the person or persons that fill in while you're away.
That is definitely a good question. It is the response. Well, for one, I want to say that the church continue to pay the pastor's salary during Sabbath leave.
Would you say that again, please?
I said the church pays the pastor's salary during Sabbath leave.
Okay, is that a part of the policy?
It is part of the policy, and I'm trying to find out where it is in the policy.
But suppose
I will look it up for you. You keep talking.
I was going to say that, but the pastors still get paid by the church. And you talked about who fills in, and I want to read this part. It said, encourage pastoral duties during the period of leave to be fulfilled by supply ministers, certified lay ministers, and neighboring clergy with arrangements made by the local church and the district superintendent. And if it's planned ahead of time, then the clergy is able to put this in place where the congregation can put this in place ahead of time, so that when the time comes, they have already set aside finances for people to fill in. And then you might get clergy who just might do it because they know that the pastor is going on a Sabbath leave, and they say, hey, I'll preach on a Sunday, and they might not even ask for compensation.
And I think it's also important to remember, as part of that policy, it's with the approval of the district superintendent.
Exactly.
So this is a conversation that takes place between those three parties.
It is. It's a conversation. And if you are in your, let's say, 6th year, and you, or 13th year, 20th year, and it's coming up, it would probably be good to have that conversation with your congregation, like a year and a half out. Hey, in 2023, I'm going to take a Sabbath leave. Let's talk about what that would look like, because then it will not be a surprise to your congregation when you take it.
One of the misunderstandings has been with this policy is that you have to be in an appointment, a single appointment continuously for 7 years.
So, Dr. Smothers, are you asking that as a question or a statement? Or?
I'm asking it as a question for clarification for our audience.
I cannot answer that. Whether you have to be in the same setting for 7 years, and I must say, and I'm only using a little wisdom on this one that's kind of thought through. I must say no, and the reason why I'm saying that is because we are in an itineracy system, and we can be moved to 3 different congregations in that 7-year period. So it would not be fair, and to say that a clergy person have to be in the same setting for 7 years, because you probably some of us have been in appointments for 7 years, but a lot of us have not.
There are a couple of questions that have come in, and one of these is, I think I can answer it, so maybe it can be a group answer. Someone is saying that Sabbath leave usually 1 day, or like vacation leave? A lot of ministers practice Sabbath day but not leave. So we're using some terms that have some similarities. So Nick was talking about a day of Sabbath. So 1 day every week of reconnecting to God.
Right.
And that practice does help us remain effective. But every 7 years, there is Sabbath leave, which is an extended period, 3 months in a row of leave. And yes, a lot of our clergy do practice Sabbath day. Practicing a Sabbath leave is not as prevalent among clergy, but that's the difference. One is a concentrated day every week. One's a concentrated. There's something biblical about that 7. Mm-hmm. Once every 7 days, once every 7 years. And then somebody else is asking, and this, I don't know if we can answer this or not, can the clergy use their reimbursable to pay the fill-ins?
No.
I cannot, no.
I would say reimbursable is that it's to reimburse for expenses for ministry, and churches in the conversation would need to figure out how to pay for fill-ins. But there are a lot of, as you said, there are a lot of neighboring clergy who would be happy to fill in. There could be conference staff who might be happy to fill in. There are certified lay ministers who are looking for opportunities to preach. There are people within the congregation that are looking for opportunities to preach. And we have some wonderful retired clergy who are looking for ways to serve
Bill, for
And
one,
certified lay speakers. Somebody's reminding me. Yes, we do have certified lay speakers who are looking
right.
for opportunities.
That's what I was going to say, Bill. For 1 month while I was out, my certified lay speakers, they spoke for the whole month.
Excellent.
Great.
Yeah.
And one final question before we go back to Nick. You had mentioned, Twanda, in your conversation about churches offering additional time off in lieu of additional compensation. And someone's asking, does the district superintendent have to approve that additional leave for the pastor? So my question is, did you handle that during the charge conference when you were talking about compensation, or at another time?
I handled, it was a conversation with my SPRC committee, and then the SPRC committee took it to, we have the one board, we call it a CAB, it's called the Church Advisory Board, and so they took it to the Church Advisory Board. That's how we actually did it, and it's actually, if I can remember, it's actually in the policy, the conference policy. Because it talks about it talks about the vacation recommended as a minimum benefit for pastors, the 4 weeks as a minimum benefit.
Okay, thank you. And last question I can answer. So if you want to continue, Nick, we'll get, when we have more questions, we'll get to those as we proceed through. So thank you for letting us pause in and break into for those questions.
Oh yeah, they were great.
Let me. Oh, before I go to this real quick, I just want to say, here it is. It said, let me see something. This agreement shall be worked out by the Staff Person Relations Committee in close consultation with the pastor, although charges may grant time of in excess of, but not less than the applicable figure. You know, in excess of the 4 weeks, but not less than.
Okay.
And that's worked out between the SPRC committee and close consultation with the pastor.
So more is okay, less is not.
Exactly. More is okay, less is not.
Got it.
Okay. All right. So
we're going to shift into the last few minutes of our presentation tonight. If you remember, the last part of our objective was that you were going to get to go home today with some things that you can practice. And so before we get to those, I just want to say, so for the SPRC folks in the crowd, if someone ever asks you, what is my pastor doing on his or her Sabbath day, this might be something what it looks like. And so you're going to, from earlier, you might light a candle, you might eat good food, you might take a nap, but the idea is that you're going to consecrate the time so that you can remember what is beautiful, what is honest, what is good. And what I want to offer you now are just 3 practices that you can walk out of here tonight, clergy. And I would say to the laity as well, this is not restricted to clergy. If you're taking your own Sabbath time, these are things that you can do. And so before we get to them, I want to say very clearly again, we're talking about a day a week in our clergy's cases. And as again, I'm going to offer you these 3 activities. You could do all 3 of these in a day. You could do one for your whole day. But here are some things you can do this week when you walk out of here tonight. So the first one is, it sounds very simple. You can take a walk. But this is a walk that you take that doesn't have a destination, right? Normally, when we take a walk, we're going from point A to point B. Usually, we're trying to get there quickly. We have a destination. We don't take the time to notice things. But on a Sabbath day, you might start out your Sabbath day with a walk. And you might walk slowly. You should walk slowly. And you want to walk silently. And again, you don't want to go anywhere. You just sort of want to amble or take a stroll. And as you're taking this walk, if you're drawn to something, if you're outside and you're drawn to something like a leaf or a stone or a color, the idea is to stop and pause and linger and to listen. This is one of those moments where I said, if you want to hear God speak clearly to you, this is one of the things you could do on your Sabbath day. Take a walk, no destination, walk slowly and pay attention to all the things that are around you. And if you come to something that draws your attention, consider that God. Consider God moving in that moment, and take a moment to pause and to pay attention to what God's saying through that particular thing. The second one, and this is my favorite of the three. I did this one when I led a retreat day for clergy a couple of months ago. We actually went through this practice, and so here's the idea. It says, the Buddha says, if we truly understand the power of giving, we will never let even a single meal pass without sharing it with someone. So the practice is this. Sounds a little strange, but bear with me for a minute. You're going to walk through your home or your office, if that's where you happen to be. Walk through your home or your office and look at all of the stuff that you've accumulated. And if you're like me, you have lots of stuff, right? So go through your house and look for the stuff that you've accumulated. And in particular, look for those things that are beautiful, things that hold beauty for you, things that are inspiring or that are nourishing. So take an inventory of what's in your house, take a stroll. You could take a walk, much like the prayer walk that I suggested. Don't go anywhere in particular, but just walk around and pay attention to things. Look at the things you've accumulated, especially the things that are beautiful, that are inspiring, or things that nourish you. All right, that's the easy part. The last part of this practice is to think of taking one of those things and gifting it to someone else. The process, though, is to think about who would you give it to? And how would this thing, whatever it is, how would this thing bless the person that's going to receive it? And so it's giving of things we have in abundance, but in particular, things that are beautiful, inspiring, or nourishing. Figure out what that thing is. Process and pray and listen for who you might give that thing to. Why should they receive it? And how would it bless them? All of those things, the process, the listening, the engagement. And then if you want to take it, the last step, it would be actually to gift it, to give it away, to offer it to the person to whom you think it might bless. And here's the last one. Simple stuff, 3 simple tasks. But again, if you're wondering, what is my pastor doing on his or her Sabbath leave? Or if you're a clergy person here tonight, what could I do this week on my Sabbath day? Here are 3 things. The third one, very simple. Take a moment to think about someone in your life that you are thankful for. Think about what it is that you are thankful for. Why are you thankful for that person? What gift has that person given to your life that you're thankful for? The next step is to write that person a thank you note. So you're going to sit down with a piece of paper on your Sabbath day, dear friend, and you're going to thank them for how they have gifted you, what they have offered you in your life that has been a gift. The key piece to this practice, though, is it goes beyond it. While you're writing, you want to hold that person in prayer. You want to envelop them in prayer. You want to pray for them by name. You want to send the Spirit their way, right? And see how God speaks to you through your writing and in the silence. And then if you want to take it to its final step, you could mail the letter. I would love to hear from you if you do this and you mail it and see what response you get. You don't have to, though. The exercise is writing the letter, recognizing what you're thankful for or who you are thankful for, praying for that person, holding that person in prayer. And then if you want to go be a little bit more bold, send it. So I want to bring us back to this. Sabbath does not require us to leave our house, change our jobs, to go on retreat, or to leave the world of ordinary life. We do not have to change clothes or purchase any expensive spiritual equipment. We only need to remember what is beautiful, what is honest, what is good. And hopefully those 3 things that I've offered you today, I'm hoping that you will go out this week, do one of them, do all 3 of them this week when you take your Sabbath. And I would love to hear from you as to how those things went and if they were useful for you. And to wrap it up, I just want you to sit with this question, the first question in particular. how are your current Sabbath practices, both clergy and laity alike, how are your current Sabbath practices building your resilience for ministry, and how are the SPRC folks supporting our clergy so they can engage in those practices, and what fruit is coming from it?
Thank you, Nick.
Thank you.
I'm going to stop sharing and turn it over to Bill for any other questions that we have.
Well, before you jump in the question,
go ahead, sir.
A couple of other things that might be helpful for people to consider for those pastors who do liturgical preaching or follow the liturgical calendar. In our Christian planning around preaching, there are natural seasons or natural ebbs and flows that also are conducive with Good Sabbath. With a little work, and both of you have emphasized the benefit of getting ahead of this and looking down the road. You can meet with the local congregation and begin to think, when is the best time for this? Like most, I won't say most, but some congregations don't realize that right now during Advent season and the Christmas season are some of the busiest times for clergy. Mm-hmm. And getting stuff prepared and implementing it and all of that. And we're literally tired. We come to the end of the year exhausted from just all the preparation and keeping up with all of the things that are involved, because these are things on top of the normal things that we have to do. And then on top of all of that, the annual conference superimposes on that evaluations, end of year reports, this thing, that thing, and the other thing. So there are a lot of things that are going on that are administrative in nature that are also filling up a lot of time. And you would think then that January would be a good time to start your Sabbath, but in the real world, people are now thinking, okay, it's time to reset. And we need you to get ready to help us plan for the new year. But so I think people have to be sensitive around that. Every high and holy season, you know, when you're doing Lent, when you're doing Easter, when you're doing Advent, when you're doing all of these things, all of these are putting additional time. We're doing quadruple. The other thing that I want to mention is many of our colleagues are doing some awesome work with online ministries and digital ministries. But I've talked to a couple of colleagues who said, you know, I can't even take vacation because I'm the one behind the camera. I'm the one who's operating the Zoom or the Facebook or all of that, and no one in my church has stepped up to learn those skills. So that's in addition to all of these other things. So before your two great minds get away from us tonight, I want to, you know, get some wisdom from you all on how we incorporate that, because there are a lot of things that are going on in churches, and not every church suffers from this. Some of these churches have phenomenal lay folk who really step up to the plate and begin to understand these things. And then some of them struggle that in this day and age, you can't expect the pastor to take on 3, 4 more roles and then be in his or her right mind all the time, because it's a lot. It's a lot. It's a lot. It's a lot. So either one of you, either of the three of you that would like to address those issues before we come to a close. Nick?
Yeah, I was thinking the technology piece has been interesting for me. I have some technological skill, but I'm not skillful, I would not say. And yet, in order to be with you all tonight, normally we would have Bible study tonight on Zoom. And so I knew with about a good week's notice that I was able to hand it off to a layperson tonight. not only to lead Bible study, which they would have done in person had we been in person, but they were able to log on and do all, the technological piece without me. And so that's a gift. It's a gift. I know that I have those folks in all three churches who can step in for me for those kinds of tasks. But I also know I have colleagues, and I've served churches where that wouldn't have been the case necessarily. And yeah, I would say this season has done two things. It's done what I said earlier. It's allowed us to do these new cool things that are going to help us in the future, but it also has significantly placed more work upon the church, and in many cases has trickled down to the pastor. So I would say in this season, as opposed to any other so far in my ministerial career, stepping away and taking this time is even more critical. I think, Rodney, you said, because you want your pastor to be in their right mind. You want them to be ready and to go, and yeah. Twanda, sorry if you want to add to that. Or...
No, that's okay. I was going to ask Dr. Smothers just to kind of repeat the question again. I'm sorry.
The question was, with the advent of pastor having to take on additional responsibility around all the technology and digital responsibilities that we have. Now, I know in your particular case, individually, you have a great video team and a digital master who handles all of that for you. But it's still, there's some churches that haven't arrived at that place yet, and it's all on the pastor.
Let me say, Dr. Smothers, we were not there. We were not there either. And really that came from in the beginning of the pandemic, as the pastor trying to get us on Zoom, trying to create some video, some kind of worship, trying to just do it. Mm-hmm. And showing up on Sunday, and the congregation really could see, some people in the congregation that's in tune with the pastor could see my panic. They could see that I was a little all over the place, right? And so when you said, having that video person, it was just tapping into other gifts, right, that people had that I did not know that they had until the pandemic. So what I started doing is, in the midst of the worship service, just saying, you know what, the pastor, this is just not my gift. If somebody in the congregation know how to do, this is the need of the congregation. If somebody know how to do it, please let me know. And our musician stepped up and said, Pastor, what do you need? And this is exactly what I said to him. I need to get to DC. I need a limo, but I don't know how to get there. Please get me to DC. And so really it was tapping into, we have people in our congregation that have other gifts that we probably do not know. So it was tapping into other gifts.
Okay, Bill, let me say one other thing and I'm gonna let you add.
I want to give you a follow-up on that though, Dr. Smothers, because I have a wonderful position that post-COVID, and for a short time when the Mission Center was open, I get to sit in an office right next to yours. So when I have questions and I need wisdom, I went right to the source. Something you've taught me since I've been on conference staff, who will do this with me?
There you go.
And we don't even have to limit ourselves to our local church membership. Why are our churches not partnering with one another and doing worship together via Zoom?
Can I say?
We've got a couple of churches that do that.
I was going to say that, yes.
And I think more of our churches could do it together and share the responsibilities and share the costs and share the preaching load and share the musical load and put some wonderful, but it always comes back to that question that I just hear your little voice inside my head, Dr. Smith, not a little voice. The James Earl Jones of our annual conference, I hear that voice of, who will do this with me?
I like that.
Yeah, I think that part of that too is that we are thinking, as you know, Bill and I put our heads together and release some funds to help people get on board with technology. And we're continuing to evaluate the effectiveness of that as we morph over into 2021. And we've been having some very good discussions about how we can be more helpful to churches. But the one thing that I want to leave us with that we did not discuss directly is that we are so blessed as a denomination to be connected with resources that are incredible. And one of the things I would want to attach to this Sabbath wagon is churches really asking this question to their pastors. What training or advancement are you taking that's helping you grow in areas that you would like to grow, but also promoting spiritual health for you?
That's a good question.
And Twanda, I called you personally because after I read your book, what did I tell you? I started putting copies of it in the mail.
Yes.
I didn't wait for Christmas. I immediately started mailing colleagues all over the place. And they got their books. They said, what is this for? I didn't put a note in it, anything. And I said, whatever you're doing, drop it and read it right now.
Thank you.
Because it's that type of resource. Iron does sharpen iron, but our context and culture of ministry is evolving. And our partners in ministry are the laity. We cannot do this by ourselves.
That's right.
And the longer pastorates are, and that 7-year period is actually the sweet spot, for those of us who've had opportunities to serve, beyond that 7-year term. Bill, how long did you serve the church you served before you came to conference staff?
I served there 11 years, 11 and the
years.
church prior to that, 7 years.
Right.
And that is a sweet spot once you get past that 5, 6, 7 year mark.
Right. And the longest I've served a single church has been 10 years. And, most churches, many of our churches, particularly our smaller congregations, don't have that benefit because of many things that are going on. They're changing pastors every 2 to 3 years. But for our churches that are in that mid-range, and this is my personal assessment, churches in the mid-range are the best candidates for going to that next level, but often are always struggling with the dynamics of, do we really want to invest the resources to go to that next level? And I can tell you without apology, digital ministry is not going away.
That's right.
The role and function and the day-to-day operation of churches is going to increase with a larger digital footprint. We're going to be doing both and which means that this Sabbath thing is going to become even more important because we're going to have to give people increased cycles of rest. And we're not going to deal with it in this broadcast, but even the denomination is working on some structured rest for pastors that all of you know about because you're involved in it behind the scenes like we are. And I hope the local churches become receptive to it because this is going to give them healthier pastors and going to result in healthier congregations. Ephesians 4 says we're here to equip the saints for the work of ministry. And you all have done that tonight with excellence, your experience. Nick, where can people be in touch with you if they would like to reach out to you?
Sure. Can I put it in the chat?
Yeah, go ahead. Put it in the chat. Make sure you select panelists and all attendees. While you're doing that, the one question has come in that I cannot let rest. And we may not be able to answer this, but somebody is reaching out to how do we go about to find a therapist?
Okay.
Bill, I would say if they have our insurance.
So if they're if they're full-time clergy and have Westpath, we have an employees assistance program, which will pay for, I think, up to 9 therapy sessions.
It pays for up to a certain amount with a copay, but I think after you hit that, if I can remember, then the copay goes away. So it's not limited as to how many sessions you can have. What is limited to is how many sessions you have to pay with a copay.
And I would add to that, and if you're not in our insurance program, go to your primary care physician. Exactly. They know more people in the business, and just lay it all out for your primary care physician. This is what I'm feeling. This is what I'm going through.
Right.
Help.
Right.
Who can I talk to? So I did not want that to go past somebody reaching out to us
I'm going to
tonight.
tell you what's the blessing in our insurance, that not only will you be covered, but those that's in your household.
Yes.
Yeah, that's right.
They will be covered as well.
Yeah.
And they don't have to be on your insurance.
Okay.
Excellent. So we have extended our time a little bit tonight. So I'm going to call us to wrap this up. I know we could probably do another training Tuesday on this, so we'll put that in our file of future things to revisit, revamp, reboot.
Twanda, did you put your stuff in the?
I'm doing that now.
Okay, thank you.
And as you're okay, I see what you're doing. I'm going to, as Twanda's doing that, I'm going to close this out with a word of prayer and a blessing. Would you pray with me? Holy and gracious God, we give you thanks for your example of hard and fruitful and difficult and challenging work that you went through. But most importantly, your example of taking rest. That if the God of the universe, the creator of everything, the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end, can rest, so can we. Because there is only one God, and it is not us. So help us, oh God, to take in what we have heard tonight and to put it into practice. For those who are clergy, help us rest. Help us take deep and holy rest. For the laity on our call tonight, help us rest so that we can be of good work to our churches and to our families and to our communities, and help our laity to become advocates for their pastors. Because if nothing else, help us to remember that healthy churches are dependent upon healthy pastors. So be with us as we depart tonight, O God, and help us as we celebrate the birth of your Son, our Savior, Jesus the Christ. It's in his name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Good night, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us tonight. God bless. Bye now.